All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to review everything from the beginning of what we learned about Moses' life up until the point where Pharaoh said, yes, I will let God's people go, who were the Israelites. So on the first slide here, you see that there it looks like water, which it is. It is the Red Sea being parted, and the people here in the middle are going free, which would be the Israelites as they cross the Red Sea after God has softened Pharaoh's heart to let them go. Now this story started with Miriam. Remember that Miriam was the sister of Moses and Aaron. She saved Moses from Pharaoh's evil plan to kill all the Israelite boys at birth. Remember, he was very, very intimidated by them. He was scared of them, and so he came up with this plan that he was going to kill all the Israelite baby boys. And so she saved him by floating Moses on the Nile in a basket, and that is where Pharaoh's daughter found him. Now, Miriam was also given the opportunity by God to suggest to the princess that her mother could be the nurse, and so that gave her mother the opportunity to continue being a part of Moses' life as baby Moses was raised. Now we know that in Moses' early life, he was brought up as royalty because he was basically treated like the child of the princess of the Pharaoh. But because he saw how the Israelites were treated and he saw kind of their point of view, he did have sympathy for them. Now, after he became an adult, remember he saw an Egyptian that struck a slave, and this angered him very much. So he ends up killing the Egyptian and hides the body in the sand. But there was someone who had seen what Moses did. And so because he is scared of his life, he flees and runs from Egypt. Now, Moses is considered a prophet in the Bible. The difference between a prophet and a Messiah is that a prophet is someone who God talks to. That's what we consider a prophet. Messiah is a leader or savior of a particular group or cause. In this case, the Messiah is Jesus. But Jesus has not come yet, so there is no Messiah at this time. There's only the prophet Moses that God talks to. Now, when God revealed himself to Moses, he called him and told him that he was very important in saving God's people. And so Moses was able to talk to God through a burning bush. God identified himself by saying, I am who am, and calls Moses to be his voice of truth and therefore to bring justice to the Israelites because the Egyptians were not treating them very fair at all. So Moses goes back to Egypt, and when he goes back, he comes to Pharaoh and he says, let my people go. God has said, let my people go. But Moses refused. So because he refused, God decided to let the 10 plagues fall upon the Pharaoh and Egyptians. And so here we just kind of have a painting that they drew right here, just imagining what kind of chaos there might have been during all this time. The first plague is that the water was turned into blood. So all of the rivers and everything turned into blood. And then we saw that the second plague, frogs came upon the land and took over. The third plague was the gnats, or the biting flies. The fourth was flies, lots and lots of flies. The fifth was pestilence. And what pestilence means is that the livestock died. Remember, that was the cattle, the horses, the donkeys, the camels, all of that belonged to the Egyptians died, but it did not impact the Israelites because God protected them. The sixth one was boils. Those are, like we talked about, the giant pimples all over your skin. They're very painful. They're kind of like, they're worse than chicken pox, but they were just incredibly painful. And so that was definitely not something that you wanted to have happen. You were just completely miserable. The 7th was hail. That was large chunks of ice that fell from the sky. The 8th was locust. We talked about how those were the giant grasshoppers that came over and took over the land. And remember, the locusts also destroyed their crops. So this was really, really bad for the Egyptians. The 9th was darkness. Darkness came and just completely took over the land. Everything was dark. There was no light. So that would be like if the sun never came up. Now the 10th was probably the most tragic for the Pharaoh, and that was the death of the firstborn. So every Egyptian household, the firstborn died. And the only way to prevent that was God had told Moses to tell the Israelites that if they took a lamb, a perfect lamb which had no blemishes, and they smeared the blood over their doorpost, they would be passed over by death. And so that's why we call this event the Passover. And Jewish people actually celebrate that usually around Easter. So this year it's the first week of April. Now, after the 10th plague, Pharaoh decides he's going to let the Israelites go. So he lets them go, but because Pharaoh never does anything without second-guessing God, he decides that he's going to change his mind. And so he sends the armies to get the Israelites. And it was on the shores of the Red Sea, the beautiful ocean that we saw at the very beginning of this video, that God actually completely kills the Egyptians. They are covered by the water as the Israelites are going into the parting of the sea, and unfortunately the Egyptians are swallowed. Now, if you wondered about where they went, I wanted to show you. We talked about how for 40 years the Israelites wandered in the desert towards their promised land, which was Canaan. So right here, I have my little pen here, and so I'm going to show you right here where I'm tracing. This is where it starts, okay? So for 40 years, they go all through here. They go through Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai was where the 10 Commandments were written. And they continue all the way through here. They cross over, cross back, and then they finally end up right here in Jericho, Canaan. All right. And so we are done, guys. Thank you so much for watching the video. You've got some worksheets from your workbook pages 99 through 102. If you did not do those, you can go ahead and work on those. There's a Moses word search. If you have not done that, go ahead and do that. And if you missed the part 3 of the story of Moses that I posted the video for, make sure you watch that too. That'll give you a better idea because it's got more pictures and it's more of a complete story for you.